Hi gang, here I am on the beach, on my vacation. Don't believe me? Check out this view. What? What? And you know what? I'm on vacation and I have a cold too. How awful is that? And so I thought about it. I said, you know what? I really don't need to make a video this week. A, I'm on vacation. And B, I have a cold. But then I remembered the old phrase, WWJD. What would a Jedi do? And a Jedi would put himself in a healing trance because I feel awful. But the spice must flow, as do these videos. So let's get started. Folks, I have taught a lot over the past few months defending the expanded universe and giving rebuttals to other people who just don't know much about it. I'm winding down my discussions about defending the expanded universe, and pretty soon next month I'll probably be celebrating the expanded universe, which a lot of you have already asked me to start doing. But before I do that, I want to go over a few pages of quotes I've gathered over the past month. Some of these did not make, actually all of these did not make any of my previous videos. And since a few are saying, Matt, what other quotes do you have for us? Well, here's a few. First off, a few weeks ago, someone tried to convince me that George Lucas just didn't care about the expanded universe, which I think is completely insane. If you're looking at just the 2 billion or 1.8 billion alone in novels, we're not counting all the video games, which were mainly all expanded universe. Also remember, toys, there was a whole Shadows of the Empire toy line. That's all expanded universe. So is all the other stuff that came from the novels and the books. In fact, some characters from the movies that were given names in the books would qualify as an expanded universe character. So if you add all that up, it comes up to about $8 billion is what the expanded universe is bringing in to Lucasfilm. Lucasfilm's total worth is about $30 billion. So you know, calculating that out, it's almost 1/3 of Lucasfilm's income was from the expanded universe. It's slightly below 1/3. But still, that's something big. I think George would care about that. But let's go ahead and get to a few quotes here. First off, talking about everyone, all the EU haters love to pull that Starlog quote, right? I don't read those books. They ignore, on Wikipedia, right below that, Leland Chee's response, which I've quoted before. I won't quote for you tonight. But here's Timothy Zahn from November 1997 in an interview titled The Book Report. And in it, they asked about his relationship with George. And he says, occasionally, I'll ask him a question, he'll give me an answer. He does go on to say that he met with George for a few minutes, kind of go over what they were going to cover in this book. Remember, there was supposed to be nothing after this. George was basically gone. He was moving on. And so the books were just an afterthought of the series. And the question was, that came up in the interview is, I heard that George Lucas doesn't read Star Wars novels, or he only reads a few, because he has read a few. And he says, has he read the Thrawn trilogy? And if so, what did he think about it? And Timothy Zahn says, as far as I know, he hasn't read any of my novels. From what I've heard, Lucas is a visual man. He likes the comic books for the visual aspect. Frankly, I don't think he has time to read, so I'm not offended. And yes, George is a very busy man. But just because he chooses not to read the books doesn't mean he doesn't care about them. So I agree with Timothy Zahn there. The next one, Stan Sansweet, November 2011, StarWars.com. He said, Lucas Books has always checked with the boss to make sure that none of its projects interfere in any way with anything that he is planning. And while plans can change, rest assured that the wonderful expanded fictional universe enjoyed by so many fans has in no way stomped or trampled any of George Lucas' prerogatives or options. And this is exactly what I've been talking about before, that the expanding universe fit in perfect continuity with the films. Now, I have the other quote over here. I forgot to print it out. Actually, I just looked it up. Folks, if you know the New Yorker, they actually did an article. The man, and I think it was January 6, 1997. The author was John Seabrook. And John Seabrook actually spent a day on Skywalker Ranch. And he wrote about the day-to-day activities that go on. And this is one of the things from his article in the New Yorker, 1997, January 6. John Seabrook. He said, new developments in the remotest corners of the Star Wars universe are always approved by Lucas himself. The continuity editors send him checklists of potential events, and Lucas checks yes or no. When Bantam wanted to do a backstory on Yoda, George said that it was off limits because he wanted him to remain a mysterious character. But George has made available some time between the start of Episode 4, when Han Solo is a young pilot on the planet Corellia, and the end of the prequel. So they're working on that now. And what he's talking about there is the A.C. Crispin trilogy that came out later on that year. So George didn't read every book, no, but he had a checklist of what they could and couldn't do. He got the overall story, said, no, I like this, or change this, or this is okay. No, you can't do a story about him. George did have a lot of involvement in the expanded universe. Now, let's go to Shelley Shapiro, the editorial director of Del Rey, December 2007. This was a StarWars.com article titled Telling War Stories. And the question was, can you sketch out for us the editorial process that resulted in the New Jedi Order series? How involved was George Lucas in the details, planning and plotting on various books, and in the choice of writers? How much independence do the writers have, and how much do you have as an editor? And she responds, we started our planning sessions with the agreement that we wanted to do a vast multi-book series. Then we brainstormed ideas. What kind of crisis would face our characters? How would we want to see both existing generations and characters develop through the series, and what we would find most exciting to play with. Now, once we came up with a sketchy outline of where we wanted to go from start to finish, we had to get approval from George. For example, as I mentioned earlier, he told us that we could kill off only certain characters. And this is from an earlier quote that I gave. I said they asked for Luke Skywalker. He said no. Now, I need to retcon something else I said in that earlier video. He said, according to this, Luke Skywalker, C-3PO, and R2-D2 were off limits. So it wasn't just Han Solo that George put on the chopping block. He also put up Leia, Lando, and Chewbacca, and they chose Chewbacca. But the three characters that were off limits, according to George, were Luke and the two droids, which I found interesting. I didn't know that. It says, we originally intended the enemy to be dark side Force users, and George told us they had to be non-Force users. Again, I always thought it was the author's decision to make them living outside the Force. No, they wanted to make them dark side Force users. I did not know that. Actually, that was George's decision, saying, no, they're non-Force users. They said, okay, so can we make them outside the Force? Yes, that's fine. So George was the one that kind of came up with the idea. Isn't that kind of weird? It was a great idea in my opinion. But anyway, it says, we also had a certain plan in mind for one of the characters. We were told to use a different character for this particular plan. And who they're talking about here is Jason Solo, who was originally supposed to die in Star by Star. As Lucas was reading it, he said, no, you're not killing Jason. You're going to kill Anakin Solo, who they had big plans. He was supposed to be the big hero of the series. But George at the time had the prequels coming out, and he didn't want people getting confused about Anakin Skywalker in the movies and then reading a book about Anakin Solo and thinking they were the same person. So Lucas Books had to kill off Anakin instead of Jason, and that was per George. Anyway, moving on. Here's Mark Xavier, November 2003. It was a Q&A session with George Lucas, which occurred on the USC campus November 19th, 2003. Now, in the post comments here, Mark writes, when talking about, do you read the expanded universe? He says no. Then it says, he jokingly complained, however, that now when he writes a script, he has to look through the encyclopedia to make sure that the name has not come up and doesn't come close to anything in the EU. So George did have to peek in on the EU to make sure he wasn't copying something from them. Now some people have said, wait a minute, I think he got the name Mace Windu from the expanded universe, which is true. West End Games had a character called Mace Windu back in the early 90s. But they kind of took that from George, who had an original character's name of Mace Windy, and they just switched it around. George did too. Now did he know it was from West End Games? Probably, I think so. George was a big West End Games supporter. He really liked what they did with the content. And so maybe he did use that name, but it's kind of George's for the most part. But anyway, also, he says he later commented, George, that the future of Star Wars would lie in other venues outside of the feature film, which of course is the books. Now, Let's fast forward to Leland Shee, StarWars.com, August 4th, 2004. Someone asked a question. They said a clarification is needed if the C and G level are separated. Do they form an independent canon, or are they both part of an overall continuity? Now remember, in my last video I talked about the hierarchy of canon a few weeks ago. Well, this is what I'm talking about here. The hierarchy of canon, we had G canon and we had C canon for the longest. And they were saying, what's the difference between those? Are they independent canons, or are they all one continuity? And Leland responds that there's one overall continuity. So this is what I keep telling everyone. Everyone says, well, never was considered canon. Well, actually everyone was saying that, yeah, it's all together, it all fits as one. So you need to look at more quotes than just the ones on Wikipedia. Anyway, keep going here. Sue Restoni, head of Lucas Licensing. This was June 2004, StarWars.com. When talking about, how much involvement does George have, it says, do you talk to him much? It says, yes, we always query him if we're doing something drastic to a film character or story plot. And then they said, well, isn't it a little awkward that you know more than George about Star Wars now, since they do the expanded universe? And she actually said, he knows the comics very well after a fact. He reads the comics, which is also something that Dave Filoni said, and Star Wars Insider 134 is that George reads the comics. So to say that George didn't care about the expanded universe, well, he read the comic books. So, that's a tough sell telling me that George didn't care. Also, she says that he reads the concepts for the games as well. Also, remember in that interview where Force Unleashed was coming out, he actually sat down with the developers and kind of went over some bullet points on the relationship between the Emperor and Darth Vader. So George, again, had a lot of influence there. Folks, I'm going to stop right there, and we're going to come back next week with all guns blazing. See you later.